This is kind of a short video to briefly explain what schematic channels are in Frosty and why you might want to use one. In a previous tutorial, I explained property, event, and link connections in blueprints. The thing about those is that they can only connect objects within a blueprint. What if you wanted to access a property that exists in one blueprint in a different blueprint? Well, you could reference the second blueprint inside the first and add an interface field to the second blueprint and pass the value in from the first by property connection. This isn't always possible though, as it doesn't always make sense for one blueprint to be referenced by another. This is where schematic channels come in. They allow property, event, and link connections to be passed between unrelated blueprints. Let's open a schematic channel asset and see what they're made of. You can easily find schematic channels by searching for type schematic channel asset. I'm going to open this City Alert Manager channel as it has a little bit of everything in it. So as you can see, there's definitions for properties, links, and events. If I open up a property, you can see that it has a realm, an ID, and a field type hash. Realms you should be familiar with if you watch my video on blueprints. The ID you're also familiar with, though in blueprints you have a difference between source and target field IDs. Here the fields can be either, depending on how they're used. No data is actually stored inside the channel. It is simply used to pass data from one blueprint to another. The field type hash property defines the data type of the property. For example, it could be an int32, a float32, or a boolean. You'll also notice that these values are hashed somewhat annoyingly. This is just how Frosty displays schematic channels for some reason, but if you have an XML dump, then these hashes will be resolved in there if you have a strings.txt file set up. Watch my Frosty editor tips video if you haven't done that already. Handily, you can just right click on an asset, click export, and choose XML as the file type to export just a single asset to XML. So if we open that up and collapse the events and links for now, we can see that this first property is called isActive and has a type of boolean. There's a fair few field types such as boolean, int32, float32, vec3, linear transform, and localized string, just to name some of the common ones. Note that these are case sensitive. Links work in much the same way as properties here, but are used to pass references to objects or entities rather than values. Events are a little different though. As you can see, they only have realms defined. These seem to be kind of magic to me, but it seems like the channel simply needs to have enough events declared to support the maximum amount of events that will be connected to it with the correct realms. Basically, it seems that so long as you use the same event ID on both ends of the channel, then it will magically just work. You don't need to specify the event IDs inside the channel. Using schematic channels is fairly simple. There is a schematic channel entity data object, and you simply add one in each of the blueprints you want to connect and pass your connections through it. Obviously, there are a lot of pre-existing schematic channels for you to take connections from or add your own connections to. So let's start with an example of using a schematic channel as a source. I'm going to open this blueprint just because it's one of the first ones I could find and it's basically empty, so ignore what's in here already. I'm not going to make an actual mod here. I'm just basically going to demonstrate how you would go about using a schematic channel. First, we need to add our schematic channel entity to our objects like so. Next, we're going to need to choose which channel we want to use as a source. I'm going to use that City Alert Manager channel from before. So we set that just by selecting the City Alert Manager channel in the Data Explorer and clicking this little asset inside the schematic channel. Let's say we want to access this alert level property that's in here. To do that, we need to add an output property to this channel entity. This output property value is simply just the index of the property in the channel's properties. Helpfully, this XML dump tells us what the index is, and it's 4. So we just put 4 here. Next, we need to check that our realm is correct. The property has a realm of server, so our entity should match that. Then we would simply add a new property connection with the schematic channel as the source and the property ID field as the source field ID, which in this case was alert level. And then we can connect it to something else and make sure all the flags are right and we're good to go. Simple as that. For links and events, I don't think you actually need to add anything to the entity. In the case of links, it seems like you simply add a new link connection using the ID specified in the channel. For events, you simply add an event connection using an event ID that matches an event ID that is passed into the channel somewhere else. So let's say we have a blueprint with an event connection which targets this schematic channel, and the name of that event is, I don't know, test. We would then add our event connection using this schematic channel as a source and make sure that the source event name is also test. So to use a schematic channel as a target, you basically do the same thing we just did in reverse. Instead of output properties, you would use input properties. Instead of using the schematic channel as a source, you would use it as a target. Adding new connections to a schematic channel is pretty simple too. There's not much to say about events, as I mentioned earlier. You just need to make sure you use the same IDs on both ends. Properties and links are pretty simple too. You just need to make sure you use the same IDs and provide the correct field type. You don't need to worry about hashing these values yourself either. Just type in your text normally, and Frosty will automatically hash it for you. Anyway, that's all for this short video. Thanks for watching.